Good afternoon, Britannia, or should I say bankrupt Britannia, because this new administration, if we can call them that for want of a better word, have only been in place for just a few days, and already they have given a clear and stark and sinister indication of just how reckless they are. Within 24 hours of coming to power, Keir Starmer scrapped the Rwanda plan. Yes, we all know it was a gimmick and a smokescreen. The point was that there's been 2 years of political time invested into it. It was a threat to a point. It did worry many of the illegal migrants. But more importantly, there was absolutely no benefit for Keir Starmer to just scrap it immediately, apart from showing one-upmanship over Rishi Sunak, because Keir Starmer had everything to gain from it and nothing to lose from it, because if no flights were to take off, he's on the record saying that he disagreed with it. So why scrap it? Just that one act alone shows that he is not a statesman, because a true statesman would not have given up an opportunity to benefit from something that incurred absolutely no personal risk whatsoever. But moving on to the topic of this live stream, the Labour Party are going to make the housing crisis much, much worse, no matter what they say. As you know, we have had it from the horse's mouth, no pun intended, Angela Rayner, that they plan to build 1.5 million homes. I assume she's going to just close her eyes and stick a pin in the map and decide where she's going to be building this new Milton Keynes size city, or indeed she may even base her decision about where this new city is going to appear when she's looking on the map for Palestine. Yes, that non-existent country that she's promised to recognize. But again, that's another matter. I digress again. So even if these 1.5 million homes do get built, who do you think is going to get priority? We've already seen, again, one of their reckless first decisions that they made was to scrap the law that was put in by the previous administration that forbids illegal migrants who have been deemed to be illegal migrants from applying for asylum. So they have opened the doors for 52,000 new asylum applications by people who are already here. That's just the start of it. On top of that, the boats have begun and they will be arriving en masse. Any attempt to slow down these boats by Starmer is going to be based around negotiation with the EU, and they will demand something in return. And how that will invariably end up is that Starmer will agree to take in a quota of the European migrants legally, so they won't be arriving at Dover on dinghies. They'll be arriving on ferries or aeroplanes, and they will deem them as legal, and they will then claim that they have stopped the boats, but in actual fact, they will have condemned this country to open borders and all of the problems that it entails. So if you are someone who is in need of housing, or your children are, and you are pinning your hopes on these 1.5 million homes that may or may not be built, then I'm afraid you need to take a real and significant reality check, because those homes will be given to people who have priority. And by that, I'm sure you know what I mean. On top of this, in their war based on spite, they have turned on the landlords. And this is what we have already, thanks to Guido Fawkes, which has been released, and they probably haven't even started. So I'm expecting much, much more in the very near future, and we'll see. Let me just see who's here. Good afternoon, David. I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me. I'm going to have to fit these in as and when I have time. So confining myself to a certain time can sometimes be difficult because I am running around busy day and night, but I do intend to maintain my connection with everyone, no matter what I'm doing. And David says Sunak should be forced to pay the money back he has wasted on the Rwanda bill. Well, yes. So Rwanda, what did we send to Rwanda? Well, we sent them about £300 million, give or take. We sent them 3 foreign ministers, and we sent them one migrant who actually went voluntarily because he was paid to go. And he's been given 5 years paid accommodation in Rwanda. And this migrant is happily running a business over in Rwanda, or so it seems. And if his business doesn't do well, I'm sure that he'll find a way to just come back here, because what are they going to do? So that is basically the situation. Are they going to try and claw back any of the money? I don't know. And yes, perhaps Sunak should pay it, but he won't, because he's just going to keep his head down until a new leader is elected, and then he will just disappear into the background. And Alex, new houses for illegal immigrants. I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so. But here's the worst. For those of you who are landlords, or even if you have issues with landlords, I would put it to you that punishing landlords for legislation that is not fit for purpose is not the right way to go about things. It is the legislation and the policies, and also the fact that there was no long-term housing strategy going all the way back to the late 80s. None. Not through the end of the last decade of the Conservatives under Margaret Thatcher, who introduced the AST back in 1988. And it was, I might add, introduced with the best of intention, because for those of you who are not aware, in the decade preceding the introduction of the assured short hold tenancy back in 1988, this country had changed dramatically. Just a decade before, we had a Labour government of the late 70s. A large number of the population were working in unproductive, state subsidized industries, be it coal mining, steelworks, etc., etc. So we still had the lifestyle where people would get a job in their local steelworks, their local mine, Northampton, their local shoe factory, and they may very well be working there most of their lives. By the late 80s, our country had changed. Many of these business industries that were costing the country a fortune had gone. The entire structure of the workplace had changed, and the government at the time, quite rightly, had calculated that in order to be able to continue to grow, our country needed a workforce that was mobile, because things had changed, and that obviously has increased over the decades. People may take a job for 2 years in Manchester, and they then may move to another job in London or Bristol or Birmingham or wherever that may be. That was the reason that the AST was introduced. But there was no sensible housing policy in parallel with that. And there should have been, because there are always ways of financing the building of property that need not be such a massive burden to the government. But unfortunately, they hadn't done anything, and the problem just got worse and worse and worse. And under the right to buy, which in principle was a good idea, so that somebody who rents from the state can get a big discount after X amount of years and buy the property. But these properties should have been replaced. And unfortunately, like with many things, the right to buy was exploited. One of the most common strategies, which I know from people who I know, was couples who had, say, 2 or 3 children would then either separate or claim to be going for a divorce, and then they would then be entitled to a council house each. And if they declared that they had joint custody of the children, they would then be entitled to a 2 or 3 bedroom home each, paid for assistance, and after 5 years, they both bought them. And guess what happened after that? Both those houses are then rented out to others, and the couple have just bought a new house and moved out to the suburbs somewhere, all thanks to the lack of foresight from the state in the way that they had administered this. The damage is done. The properties have gone. We know what the housing situation is like now. We are dependent on several million private landlords, many of which have been bailing out thanks to the so-called levelling up by Gove that never actually happened. Then there was the threat of a minimum EPC rating of a C by next year, which was then repealed by Rishi Sunak. But in the week before he repealed it, he passed his Energy Act, and in that Energy Act, hidden away was the sinister law about energy performance of homes, misrepresentation of it, and basically that is now there in place for this government, namely Ed Miliband, who is a net zero fanatic, to refer to. And if you do not comply with the net zero, with the energy performance directives on your property or misrepresent your property, you can face a fine of up to £15,000 or go to prison. Before I move on, let me just have another quick look at the questions. What do we got here? Comments. And the money we sent to France to stop the boat, it's okay for him, his cake bake. That is our money. Yes, absolutely. Bad negotiation. And this goes back to Boris as well. It's not just Richie. Boris was the one who basically allowed the French to take X amount of, or use X amount of our water to fish. If he had any strength of character, he would have made that conditional for a certain amount of time on the condition that they police their borders and do not allow anyone to cross, retaining the right to withdraw their right to fish in our waters should they not maintain strict monitoring and policing of their borders and prevent anyone from crossing. The threat of losing the fish from our waters, which means a lot to the French because they have a bigger appetite for fish than we do, that alone could have been enough for them to actually pull their finger out and stop these boats from crossing. But they basically just handed everything over to them, as we know. They are building loads of new homes in North Wales. I'll tell you my story. I've been waiting for 6 years to move. Isn't that a surprise? Isn't that a surprise? And I wonder who's moving into these properties. So, what do they have in store for private landlords? Well, first of all, and this is according to Guido, but they are on the record pointing out some of these issues elsewhere as well. Firstly, a total ban on no-fault evictions, and this could be just dropped on landlords at any time. And the way things are now, it will just literally just be rubber stamped and pass through Parliament. Who's going to object to it? So that basically means that if you rent your property out, then effectively you cannot recover your property by giving notice after a certain amount of time. There's two sides to this argument. There is the argument on the side of the tenants, meaning namely that vast majority of tenants in private accommodation effectively live in temporary accommodation because the standard AST is for 12 months. The reason it is normally a maximum of 12 months is not always down to the landlords. Keep in mind, it is more likely that it is down to the buy-to-let lender. They stipulate 12 months as a maximum, and that should not be the case. First of all, they should not impose a maximum on the tenants. Secondly, they should make it much easier for people to buy and sell a property with a tenant in place, so that if somebody does want to sell the property, they can sell it as it is with the tenant there, and the new owner can buy it as a going concern. But because the lenders make it so difficult to mortgage a property with a tenant in place, and there are so many questions about the tenant, that it is easier for the landlord, if they should they wish to sell the property, to evict the tenant and then sell it. So a lot of the Section 21s are the cause, the initial cause does come down to the lenders, but not always. But that's going to go. What about the people who own a home in Northampton and they get a job in Manchester for 1 or 2 years and they rent out their home because they need to rent up in Manchester? What happens when they want to come back to where they live? How do they recover their home? And will their home still be available to them? Well, I don't know, because you need to hear what else they have in store. So they want to introduce rent caps. Rachel Reeves is on the record supporting them. She's on the record in an interview with the Daily Telegraph supporting rent caps. Historically, it is proved that these do not help things. They just don't help things. They make things worse. The next one: ban landlords from selling their properties in the first 2 years of a new tenancy, extending the current limit by 18 months. So if you rent out a property currently, within the first 6 months of a new tenancy, you can't sell that property. Okay, it takes a few months, even 5 or 6 months or more, to sell a property. It's not too much of a hardship. So generally, you might leave it 2 or 3 months after the tenant moves in before you consider selling it under the current plans. But if they move it to 2 years, what would the situation be, for example, for many landlords who, as we know, last year we had interest rates more than triple for buy-to-let landlords? There were many landlords who, in the end of 22, early 23, came out of a fixed rate of 2% or less, and they had to go on a variable rate because the rate has increased so much. They were not able to refix. Why not? Because buy-to-let lenders imposed something called a stress test, and that stress test has been made more stringent in recent years. Effectively, they all have a different criteria, but basically, in short, so effectively, the stress test used to be 125% of the rent. So if your mortgage was £1,000 per month, for example, your rent had to be £1,250 or more to pass the stress test. Some lenders went as much as 140%, and some lenders went as much as 140% plus 1 or 2% in higher rate than where you are. Well, for some whose rates had gone up by 2 or 3% up until the middle of last year, buy-to-let remortgages were upwards of 6% from less than 2%. So most landlords could not refix. And the variable rate on buy-to-let mortgages was as high as 10% last year. So there are landlords out there who exited a fixed rate deal of less than 2% and was suddenly on a variable rate of 9 or 10%, which was 4 or 5 times what they were paying, and they couldn't get out of it. And the only way out of it was to sell. What would happen if they were legally prohibited from selling? Absolutely catastrophic. There's one here: force landlords to move in a family member for at least the first 2 years of a tenancy. Currently, they only have to wait 6 months. So, this is not clear, but I believe it is after recovering a property for your own use, then you had to live yourself or a member of family in it for 6 months before you can consider re-renting it. They want to extend that to 2 years to make it impractical for landlords to use the excuse that they want to move in in order to request recovery of their property, which is normally done under Section 8, if you're aware of that. And here is the rollback to the Corbyn days. If you were watching in 2019, the right to buy, landlords could be forced to offer their property for sale to a tenant instead of evicting them. That is right to buy, as previously championed by Jeremy Corbyn, just worded differently. So he's not that far away from Corbyn at all, is he? He was just a bitter, resentful, toxic Marxist in disguise. Imagine you rent your own home and you're away, wherever you're working, somewhere in the country, somewhere overseas, for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and you want to recover your home and you can't. You're forced to sell it to a tenant. Do you think you're going to get market value or anywhere near it? At that time, when Corbyn first championed this, I actually had a tenant in my own cottage here in Northampton who just wouldn't go. It was just an absolute nightmare. And then Corbyn comes along and was championing that if he won, he would give them the right to buy private homes. So effectively, the tenant could have forced me to sell my property to them. That is not right. Okay, another one. To apply a highly controversial hardship test, allowing courts to refuse a possession order if it will cause greater hardship to a tenant than the landlord. No surprise who would benefit from that one. Alex, Labour going to build on the Greenbelt and concrete the countryside. Yes. So we've got Ed Miliband pioneering onshore wind farms, and we're talking larger ones. The current turbines that we have, the footprint for the foundation, I believe, takes 800 cubic meters of concrete plus all of the steel. That land is just, and the land around it, from the from the chemicals seeping from the concrete, etc., is destroyed for forever. Realistically, there are blight on the countryside. Trees are being chopped down left, right, and centre for them. They don't run on wind; they run on subsidies, and we are losing great swathes of our countryside. Thousands and thousands of acres of farmland being taken out of production for wind turbines and solar farms, and now we've got this bunch of brain surgeons who want to build on our green belt. Why do they want to build on our farmland? We have the capacity for 2 million homes on brownfield sites. We have over 670,000 empty homes in England alone. We don't need to lose more farmland. We cannot afford to lose any more farmland, because even as it is, we hardly produce 50% of our food, and falling, because our food production is falling as land is being taken out of production, thanks to Boris signing an agreement for 30% of our farmland to be set aside to grow weeds and flowers or whatever it is. The National Trust owns hundreds of thousands of acres, is kicking farmers off their land that they rent to grow flowers and wildflowers or whatever it is. We don't need to be losing any more farmland, and we must not be building on our green belt. JB 1957. I've seen Rugby go from nice little country town turn into concrete jungle with no improvement on infrastructure. Our roads are clogged. I'm afraid that's happened to Northampton too. I've noticed Rugby has changed a lot over my lifetime. From sort of 40 odd years ago, when, like, the first time I would come and go when I first started driving. to now it's changed dramatically, as has Northampton. Northampton, when I was a youngster in the early 70s, was such a quaint little shoe town with shoe factories everywhere, Victorian buildings everywhere. And in 1968, under Labour, we had the Northampton Development Corporation. Uh, in reality, it was the Northampton Destruction Corporation, because all they did was destroy many, many beautiful Victorian buildings throughout the town, and everything, and I mean everything, that they built in their place was ugly. In Northampton, in the middle of our town, we had the ugliest building in the country. Our now since gone bus station, nicknamed the Mouth of Hell. It was blown up in 2016, and that replaced some beautiful Victorian buildings. These buildings are priceless. They are heritage. Nobody has the right to pull them down. But Labour, as always, they destroy heritage, culture, borders, everything. They are the most toxic mindset that you could possibly imagine. And this lot are so bad that within months they are going to be buckling under the pressure of anger from the British public. And I put it to you, remember those people who are supporting this horrid administration that seeks to destroy our country, because many of them in a few months' time will withdraw in shame and just try to absolve themselves of any blame for this horrendous administration that is about to cause so much damage to our country. Uh, So there's the hardship test. And here's the last one. Abolish persistent rent arrears as a reason for eviction. Currently, if a tenant falls into arrears of 2 months or more, at least 3 times during their tenancy, you then have grounds to apply for an eviction under Section 8. That is going to be abolished. So what are they saying here? Tenants won't be abolished because of arrears. They won't be they won't be You won't be able to evict them if it's causing them more hardship than it's causing you. You won't be able to sell the property in the first 2 years when you've put a tenant there, and you won't be able to recover your property with uh, under Section 21. And if you are going to evict them, then the tenant may very well demand that you sell them the property rather than evict them. Try going to court to contest that. And on top of that, as of last year, anything to do with tenancies, the law is on the tenant's side. The law will finance the tenants, and win or lose, the landlord not only could not only be liable for their own expenses, they could also be liable for the tenant's expenses, even if they win. And under these guidelines, it's going to be very rare for a landlord to win. So this is what we face. Over the course of the entire election and even in the preceding period, I had no inquiries from anyone in the media about the housing crisis, no discussion about options for solving the housing crisis. Uh, this has not been addressed. It is going to get worse, and we know exactly who will be at the top of the queue and who will be at the bottom. And those at the bottom, if they dare to open their mouths and complain, they will simply be shut down with a barrage of allegations of racism and xenophobia and you name it, that they will they will call you it. Um, this is a very, very sad situation because in reality, we can solve the housing crisis. We need to stop mass immigration. We need to stop the flow into our country, full stop. We need to get down to net zero immigration and for a few years, slightly less, so maybe minus 100,000. That would help over the next 5 or 6 years. So if we have 5 or 600,000 people leave each year, then the maximum would be, for example, 100,000 below the number who leave, which would then be 4 to 500,000. That would be enough to service the NHS and our essential services. But this madness of mass migration is absolutely catastrophic for our country. So that's all we have for the moment. I will be keeping an eye on this and I'll update you as more comes to light. But I do think that this will end in catastrophe and they will not go the distance. They just will not go the distance. They are in for a perfect storm of political crisis. It's just unfortunate that our country and the people who love this country are going to be paying the price for these toxic amateurs who have no moral, intellectual, um, uh, or even political right to run this country. They have 33% of the votes, and a vast majority of those votes were people who just voted to keep their local Conservative candidate out. And out of those with a right to vote, registered to vote, 80% did not want these people. What right do they have to do this to us? What mandate do they have to run this country? I don't give Starmer 6 months. Him and the ginger growl will be gone. Yes, I expect this to end in catastrophe. That is why we need to maintain our momentum. However you wish to vote, whatever your preference, that's absolutely fine. It's not about that, but we must maintain the momentum of calling them out, of open discussion and debate. And personally, at a local level here in Northampton, I intend to do my utmost to continue fighting for local issues. As a local councillor, I'm currently trying to push to help reduce crime here in Kingsthorpe Village. I'm going to take steps to bring more attention to homelessness and whatever I can do locally until such time as they begin to fall, and fall they will. Has anyone got a link to share out to change the election system, please? Yes, I do have one. I do have one, and I will find it and I will share it in the. I will share it in the comments. Okay. I'm sure that somebody sent me one, and I'll find it for you. And we do need to push this. Whether we have any chance of this happening, I really, really don't know. To be honest, because unfortunately, no administration is going to support a change in the electoral system that put it into power, including this lot. A large number of them were supporting PR previously, but I doubt very much that they'll support it now. So that's where we are. But I will find it and I will share it with you all. And if you have any comments or any subjects to debate or discuss, please feel free to PM me. That's why I'm here. That's what I'd like to do. Doesn't matter whether you agree with me or not. It is the debate that matters, because debate is being shut down to such a degree that we don't have a functioning democracy anymore. That's all for now. Thank you very much. Bye bye, and I'll see you soon.